r/ask Reddit. Students of Reddit, what was the reason for why one of your teachers had a breakdown during class? My 8th grade Spanish teacher and the freshman baseball coach were having an affair. It eventually became public knowledge, and she had several breakdowns as her divorce played out over course of my 8th grade year. I had the pleasure of joining the freshman baseball team the next year and experiencing his own share of breakdowns from his own divorce. Physics teacher came into class late, walked past the podium, and walked into the chalkboard. Like, he would have kept walking if it wasn't there. He then picked up one of those plastic pen things that you put chalk in. Proceeded to try and write on the chalkboard, even though the pen was empty of chalk, all the while mumbling incoherently. Found out later he had a stroke and managed to drive himself to the university. Edit. He didn't return to teaching that year, and as best I recall he ended up retiring due to health complications. He was in his 60s, and along with the stroke he had fallen and hit his head. Online searching shows he passed away about 8 years later. My math professor in college was going through a divorce and they were fighting for custody of their 2 younger children. You can tell he was irritated because he wore his emotions on his sleeve. One day he came into class about 5 minutes late and he was physically shaking. He was violently crying and apologized to us and said the class was cancelled. He apparently lost the custody fight with his ex-wife. My history and government teacher has been to Vietnam and it's quite known that he was on the front lines. So in the middle of a lecture a girl raised her hand and asked, "Have you ever killed someone?" The question caused him to go silent and leave the room for quite a while. Luckily the girl was ripped a new asshole by her fellow classmates. Some guy came in late and started talking to his friends. The teacher chimed in with something like, "If you're gonna be late, you might as well not show up at all." So he said fine, bitch, and left. She stared blankly at the door for a good 30 seconds and then yelled at everyone else in the class for what one, now absent, student did. I distinctly remember her claiming at one point that everyone in this room is failing this class. One time in math class the emo girl was not having it. I don't even remember how it got started, but she ended up bickering with the teacher and the emo girl called the teacher Thundertits. It was at this point that the emo girl was sent to the office and the teacher had to take a seat at her desk in the back for a few minutes. I can provide a more positive breakdown from years ago. English teacher realized 5 minutes into the discussion of a book that only a few people had done the assigned reading, and he put his book on a table and went on a tear about how you can't just go through life assuming that other people will pick up your slack, and that it's important to value your education and not just bullshit your way through classes. I could tell he was disappointed in the class and several students were embarrassed for not putting in a little bit of effort to read a fucking book. Grade 10 science class, we were taking turns using some kind of lung capacity measuring device. Breathe into a tube and a small plastic bowl gets raised by the force of your breathing. Something gets measured somehow. I can't really remember details aside from the plastic bowl. Anyway, the teacher takes his turn, apparently trying to show off with how hard he can breathe out, somehow breaks the measuring device. The teacher goes into a rage. After realizing he broke it, briefly tries to fix it, gives up, picks up a metal garbage can, and throws it in anger, storms out of the room, and doesn't come back for 10 or 15 minutes, at which point he returns and acts like nothing happened. It was more bizarre and amusing than anything else. During my freshman year, the culinary teacher went on leave while she had a baby. We made a pact to not talk at all for the whole time we were there. We had a little radio that we played music on while we worked, and we only played Country Roads. This was before it was a meme. After a few weeks of this, we all got pretty tired of it, but decided to stick it out. One day, the sub was explaining the recipe for us, and she just started begging us to say something. We all kinda just looked at each other as she started crying and none of us knew what to do. She walked out and didn't come back. We all felt super bad. I still do. The teacher was bullied and disrespected every day. One day an idiot threw a geometry compass and it got stuck on a corkboard, like when you do knife throwing, right beside her while she was writing on the board. Instant meltdown. In tears, she left the class and I never saw her again. Can't blame her. She probably thought her life was in danger at this point. Some schools and neighborhoods are very hard. I had a great chorus teacher. All the kids loved him. He would lose it sometimes if we were prepping for something important and kids kept talking while he was talking or teaching one section a particular part. In particular, I remember him throwing one of those plastic chairs with metal legs into the wall. He also carried a wooden hiking stick he would use as a metronome, and I'm pretty sure he sent that flying at least a couple times. Good-natured dude 99% of the time. I couldn't imagine managing classes of 50 plus high schoolers at a time without losing it from time to time. This was a university English professor. The details were fuzzy, but she quite literally had a breakdown in the middle of class about people being late, and I think a few not doing their homework. I wish I remembered the details more, but was being very accusatory of the entire class, and I'm pretty sure swore at us. She didn't yell, but talked in a very fuck all you voice, if that makes sense. She then left the room and I can't remember if she came back in, or we all went home. It was incredibly awkward. I had an English teacher in 7th grade who just could not handle our class. Like normally my friends are the ones being loud, and I'm the Asian kid laughing at them, but not saying anything. But she just couldn't deal with us. She would cry at least once a week in class. It was her first and only year teaching. Looking back, we can't believe we were that mean to her. Had this teacher who had a lot of mental problems. She couldn't get the class to shut and there was no order or discipline in the room. On one of the last classes we had with her, everyone was talking and the teacher was trying to calm us down. She eventually sat down and started reading something on our book. One of my colleagues said we were sorry and we really enjoyed her classes, but she said it in a mocking way. The teacher thought she was being honest and broke down crying. A few days later she checked in on the hospital and never came back. After that no one was ever an asshole to another teacher again. We would think twice before making a joke as we didn't know what that person was going through. That was an important lesson to learn in 6th grade. One of my teachers in high school was dealing with the aftermath of a terribly acrimonious divorce, but he shared a minor child with his ex-wife. He was normally very chill, but over the course of a few weeks he started to seem stressed and short-tempered. One day he received a personal call during the middle of the class. He took the call angrily, then walked out to the hallway, and after a while didn't return. The rumor was that he had a mental breakdown and the principal called an ambulance for him. He was out for the remainder of the school semester. She was always really crazy and mentally unstable, and this was my 6th grade science teacher. She scared the shit out of me and she broke down a few times. The class was the best behaved because she terrified everyone, but everyone would always leave as soon as they could. She was also late most days. She would go on crying rants about how disrespectful we were to her, and the only time she broke down for something other than that was during anti-drug week, when she talked about how she lost her mom to drugs. Only time I felt an ounce of sympathy for her. It was also her first year at that school, and from all the complaints, she was fired by the end of the year. She is a legend for how terrible she was. The other 6th grade science teacher was bad too, and also left by the end of that year, but she wasn't as bad. Our teacher tasked us to stack up the monoblock chairs. Then there's this one guy who just likes to mess around, starts stacking up chairs noisily, which irritates the teacher. When he did it again after the first warning, the teacher had a breakdown, asks, "Is this funny to you?" And he stacked the chair with 3x the noise and the guy almost cried. Our teacher is light-hearted and playful most of the time, hence his unexpected breakdown. The whole class were permitted to leave, except this guy who has to stack all the chairs by himself quietly. That's the only time he was ever angry for the whole school year. Teacher is super nice, so long as you try to stay awake and at least act like you're paying attention. We were also in the nicest corridor of the school, where the AC was amazing. The room was dark, and it was super empty and quiet. Most students just slept through class and passed anyway because it was algebra 2 and wasn't that difficult. Some students tried talking in class to pass the time, but he hated that. This one girl tried whispering in class like 5 or 6 times in a row, and eventually he just threw his marker into the hallway, denting a locker on the opposite side, went out, closing the door behind him, and stayed out there for the remaining 15 minutes of class.